Hello and welcome to this edition of the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Carrie Hazley, Chief of the National Weather Service Alaska Region's Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch. Today is Tuesday, September the 1st, and we're getting close to fall. In fact, meteorologically, it is the official first day of fall, and then the official first day of fall, of course, on your calendar comes a bit later in the month. So let's take a look first at some of the ways that you can get a hold of us if you're seeking weather information. The first is the Alaska Weather Information Line. You give that number a call and it takes you to a menu system where you can select the area of the state that you want weather information for. That number is 1-800-472-0391. You can find us on the web at anytimeweather.gov/Alaska, and on that homepage there's a map. You just simply click the map in the area that you want to forecast for. It'll take you right to that local forecast, and then you can also replace the word Alaska with the words Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Juneau, and then it'll zoom the map in a bit more, makes it sometimes a bit easier to find the place that you are looking for. Lastly, you can find me by email anytime. I always love to hear from you guys and hear what you are dealing with as far as weather and water in the area where you live. My email address there on the screen is carrie.hazley@noaa.gov. Now, we don't have any watches, warnings, or advisories out, so I don't have the map here in my show today. So I wanted to go ahead and start by taking a look at the satellite picture and just diving into what's going on with the overall pattern across the state, which is a pretty active one. We do see widespread cloud cover over most of mainland Alaska, cloud cover down over the Panhandle and the Aleutians as well. So taking a look at the Panhandle specifically, we had a jet stream that just took its aim from the north part of the Pacific into southeast Alaska, and with that it kind of pushed a weather system along the Panhandle today. We saw widespread rain associated with that. And those higher clouds that you see there on satellite, those actually are associated with the jet, and those cause some issues for upper level flying aircraft because of some turbulence associated with that jet stream. Over mainland, though, we just see the clouds rotating their way around multiple areas of low pressure. Same is really true out over the Panhandle. So at the surface, low pressure really is the story, where we see widespread shower activity associated with multiple areas of low pressure across mainland Alaska. Those are just really going to be anchored in place as we go through the next couple of days. And over higher terrain today, some of the precipitation that did fall was able to fall in the form of snow. It was cold enough up there at higher elevations. So a couple things I want to draw your attention to on this map here. So out along the west coast, where you see some of those pressure lines a bit closer together, we are seeing some gusty winds that would be from the area up around Point Hope down towards Shishmaref, where we've got some gusty winds that then get kind of squished through the Bering Strait between 15 and 25 knots most places there. So not outside of the realm of normal for this time of year, but enough to cause some elevated surf that's given us some concern that we could see some very minor erosion, particularly in the Shishmaref area. So we don't have any watches, warnings, or advisories on it out. We're not expecting it to be that significant, but we will certainly keep an eye on it. But just something we wanted to make sure that everybody in that part of the state was aware of. Otherwise, in that area, in addition to gusty winds, we are looking for showers and maybe some fog to develop through the overnight hours tonight, and that really is just going to be kind of the story as we go through the overnight hours elsewhere in the state as well. The strongest winds there, though, in the northern part of mainland. Over the rest of mainland Alaska, just cloudy and scattered showers are definitely the story. Low pressure anchored over the central part of the interior, and then also another area of low pressure over the Bristol Bay area as we go through the overnight hours. That low that moved across the Panhandle today, that's going to be far off into the Canadians' area of responsibility. So shower activity over the Panhandle should taper off a bit overnight, but we will look for some of that to return as we go through the day and the morning tomorrow. High pressure dominates the weather today, tonight, out over the far western part of the Aleutians, but that actually gets replaced by a new area of low pressure that pushes its way onto the far western part of the Aleutians for the day on Wednesday. Another weather maker there pushes its way from the North Pacific towards the Panhandle for the day on Wednesday. So with these two systems, we're going to see more in the way of widespread rainfall and not just intermittent showers. Along the rest of the Gulf Coast, an area of low pressure there is going to spread some shower activity and also the possibility for a couple of lightning strikes, maybe some pop-up thunderstorms along the Gulf Coast because we've got the warmer, at least relatively warmer Gulf of Alaska, so some lightning along the Gulf Coast is actually pretty normal for this time of year. Also could see a few lightning strikes up along the Alaska-Canadian border, along that area of low pressure there with the showers that we are seeing. Precip across the rest of mainland should stay in the form of rain with the exception of some snow over the higher terrain. Getting into the day on Thursday, the active pattern starts to persist. We see another weather maker push its way into the far western part of the Aleutians. Not a very strong area of low pressure for this time of year, certainly nothing like what we saw over this past weekend, but enough to bring some gusty winds up to about 25-30 knots in some places in the Aleutians, and then more widespread rainfall. That system is also going to help to weaken the low pressure that's anchored over mainland Alaska, start to kick some of that out. But on Thursday, it is going to be yet another wet day for mainland Alaska with shower activity in most places. And again, over higher terrain, it is cold enough at this point for the showers that we do see to be in the form of snow. Thursday, we could also see a few lightning strikes along the Alaska-Canadian border. Now moving on to temperatures to start off our Wednesday morning. Temperatures should be above freezing every place except over the highest terrain, including over the Arctic coast where we are going to see our coldest temperatures, where we'll look for those to be in the range of about 36-37 degrees most places. So AKwx, you'll start your morning off at about 37 degrees tomorrow, also under cloudy skies with some fog. That's going to help to keep temperatures pretty stable there. Up over the Brooks Range, temperatures are going to get a bit closer. In fact, they may actually get below freezing in some places. Anaktuvuk Pass starting off Wednesday at 34. Over towards Tanana, 42 degrees to start off your Wednesday morning. McGrath also at 42, and 39 down at Bethel to start off the Wednesday morning. Dillingham 42, and then 48 to start off the day at Kodiak. 50s will start off our Wednesday down over the Panhandle. Into the day on Wednesday, we see the 50s stick around over the Panhandle, though, getting up into more of the upper 50s, so we start to see at least some red on the map here. So 56 will be the high temperature tomorrow for Sitka, and then moving around towards south central Alaska, we could see Kodiak eke out a 60. Every other ways, we're looking for mostly 40s and 50s, so upper 50s in south central with a 58 degrees for the high on Wednesday at Palmer and also there at Homer. Further north, Galena, 54 degrees for a high temperature on Wednesday, 59 for a high temperature in the Fort Yukon area tomorrow, and a bit colder out along the west coast where the flow's primarily out of the north. So just getting up to around 50. In some places, 48 will be the high temperature for Bethel on Wednesday afternoon, 50s out along the Aleutians. Now into Thursday morning, we aren't seeing much in the way of cool down in places where we have clouds, so not a big swing in temperatures, which is actually something pretty normal for this time of year. So AKwx, you're going to start your Thursday morning off at about 37 degrees, just around freezing in the Brooks Range, and then in the low 40s through most of the interior, upper to mid 40s across south central, out the Aleutians, and then 50s to start the day on Thursday down over the Panhandle. I'll be back with aviation weather after a short break.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And moving on to aviation weather now, we start by taking a look at flying weather conditions across the state for your Wednesday morning, where we'll have IFR conditions to kick off the morning up along the Arctic coast with widespread fog up on the coastal area there. Also IFR conditions on a good part of the Aleutian chain and IFR conditions stretching through the Bering Strait into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, impacting airports like Bethel and St. Mary's tomorrow, stretching around into the Bristol Bay area. So King Salmon, you'll also start off the morning at IFR, and then that IFR stretches up through the Aleutian Range, the Alaska Range, and also impacts parts of the eastern Kenai Peninsula and the upper Susitna Valley. We'll look for IFR conditions tomorrow morning along much of the Gulf Coast and the Panhandle as well, with marginal VFR conditions persisting over lots of mainland Alaska, places where we'll continue to see widespread shower activity as we go through the day on Wednesday. Now for Wednesday afternoon, that IFR does persist up along the Arctic coast. We should see some improvement in the visibility, but we are going to continue to see low ceilings up there as we have open water and just cool weather. IFR conditions out along the Aleutians, and then some IFR conditions persisting mostly over the terrain over parts of southern Alaska, and then out along the Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound area, with marginal VFR over a good portion of the interior and south central Alaska. Not much change as we get into the day on Thursday. That wet pattern really wants to stick around. So IFR conditions up along the Arctic coast Thursday morning, also out along parts of the Aleutians, along the Aleutian and Alaska ranges up into mainland Alaska, Gulf Coast, even maybe in the Anchorage area, you could see some IFR conditions Thursday morning, and then that also stretches around down into the Panhandle. Only just a bit of improvement into the Thursday afternoon time frame, with IFR conditions along the Arctic coast and out along the Aleutians, and then widespread IFR across the southern part of the state. Now for past conditions on Wednesday, we'll look for Anaktuvuk to be marginal VFR tomorrow, although IFR up on the north entrance with the fog up on the coast there. IFR conditions for Adigan as we go through the day tomorrow, and then down towards the Alaska range, we'll take a look here where we've got Lake Clark, you're going to be marginal VFR, and then Merrill, you're going to start the day at marginal, go up to IFR as we go through the day. Same is going to be true for Rainy, marginal over to IFR, and then we get to Windy Pass, marginal VFR for your Wednesday. Isabel, IFR, and then Mentasta Pass, marginal VFR for Wednesday. Down around to Tanita, marginal VFR deteriorating to IFR as we go through the day, and same is going to be true for Portage, where we'll start off at marginal and then dip down to IFR as we get later in the day. Now down into the Panhandle, those passes there, they're going to start the day at marginal and also deteriorate to IFR conditions. For freezing levels across most of mainland Alaska, we see a freezing level between 4 and about 7,000 feet, a bit higher down over the southern part of the Panhandle where it gets up to about 8,000 feet. That surface line still well up into the Arctic. And with such a wet pattern and getting into kind of a cooler tendency in the fall, we are going to look for at least the potential for isolated moderate ice over a lot of the area as we go into the day on Wednesday. So over most of mainland Alaska, we'll look for the base of that to be down at around 7,000 feet. And then once you get down towards south central Alaska, stretching out to the Gulf Coast and the Panhandle, heights are going to come up a bit, 10,000 feet, but we are going to see greater possibilities for some considerable moderate ice to show up in the area there, and that persists down in the Panhandle, especially as we go through the day on Wednesday. Now taking a look at the jet stream, we continue to see a strong jet just taking aim at the Panhandle and pushing moisture into southern Alaska as it does so. The strongest winds at this point are going to be either offshore out over the Gulf of Alaska, where we see winds in excess of 100 knots, or over in the Canadian airspace, where again we see some higher wind values there. Over the Panhandle itself, ranging from about 80 to 90 knots over much of the Panhandle. We also see a pretty strong jet out over the far western part of the Aleutians, with winds peaking out at flight level there up at around 90 knots. Now let's drop down a bit to 9,000 feet over much of mainland Alaska. We're going to see pretty weak winds, which is low pressure anchored in place, and so the wind's going to be a bit variable in direction. A lot of places a southwesterly component, but not every place. And then down over the Panhandle at 9,000 feet, fairly weak winds with an onshore push there, again with a westerly component. Over the Aleutians, winds primarily out of the north. Dropping down to 3,000 feet, we still don't see much in the way of concerns as far as the lower level winds go. So we do see some stronger winds from Barrow down towards the Wainwright there, where we could see maybe some offshore winds creating some turbulence. Also some northerly winds down over the Bering Sea and parts of the Aleutians. And then we are still seeing those peak out between about 25 and 30 knots. Translating that into turbulence, we're not looking for much in the way overlay of moderate as we get into the day on Wednesday. So all the areas here, isolated moderate, one out along the Aleutians, also the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, and then the southern part of the Panhandle, turbulence in all of these places below 4,000 feet.
It used to be that you could only warn one person about a tornado after it had already blown down someone else's barn.
Now, on average, we're able to issue a tornado warning 15 minutes before the tornado's even there, and that wouldn't be happening without Doppler radar.
This NextRad system has reduced fatalities on the order of 45% due to tornadoes since its advent.
We have a lot more information now about storms and being able to understand how they develop, how they produce severe weather, and how that information might be used to improve warnings for our National Weather Service partners.
The lab is unique in that we serve the nation by supporting the National Weather Service in its mission to protect lives and safe property by improving the accuracy and the lead time of severe weather warnings.
We have a legacy of radar research and converting existing technology from military to weather purposes.
A recycled Doppler radar led to the development of NextRad, installed nationwide in the early 90s. It allowed forecasters to see storms like never before.
Not only did we help bring that technology to the National Weather Service and to help protect lives and property, but we have continued to upgrade that technology, keep it relevant, and keep it state-of-the-art.
Recently, a major upgrade was added. Dual polarization technology takes the radar from 2D to 3D. Forecasters now know more about what type of precipitation is falling, which is very helpful during winter storms, as well as how much rain is accumulating, resulting in better flash flood warnings. The radar can also detect and track tornadoes based on debris. Looking to the future, the National Severe Storms Lab is testing the capabilities of phased array radar. Originally used by the U.S. Navy, the antenna scans the skies electronically rather than mechanically, allowing the radar to focus on a storm.
With current technology, we get a full picture or image of what is going on within a storm every 4 to 5 minutes. So it's more like a snapshot. Whereas with phased array radar, we get that picture of what's going on in the storm every minute, so it becomes more like watching a movie. So we can do adaptive, rapid scanning on the storms that matter most, being able to provide the information that's most relevant when and where it's happening.
Another advantage of phased array radar is its multifunction capability, providing weather and air traffic information simultaneously.
Number one, it is a system that promises to replace and expand upon the existing weather surveillance radars. Secondly, to replace aging air traffic surveillance radars. And number three, it offers a potential application to meet Department of Homeland Security and defense requirements for identifying and tracking non-cooperative aircraft. With the replacement of all these various radars with a single system, the American taxpayer could realize substantial savings in cost.
You have a lot fewer radars to maintain, and the electronic capability of this also reduces maintenance costs because you do not have moving parts.
Not too long ago, the ability to predict severe weather was thought to be impossible. During the past several decades, research conducted at the National Severe Storms Lab has developed life-saving tools like Doppler radar. We've progressed from no warning of threatening weather to about a 15-minute lead time, and current research promises to extend that much further.
Our knowledge of severe storms and how they behave, and our use and ability to use the Doppler radar technology is in a lot of cases a direct result of that close working relationship, that research to operations component that we get between the National Severe Storms Laboratory and a forecast office.
that history and understanding of how these data can be used by our users and doing the research to help advance the use of radar technology. Really, it's what we live for. It's in our lifeblood. It's in our history.
It's now easier than ever to be a part of weather research. We just launched the MPing app for both iPhone and Android users, and it's totally free. PING, which stands for Precipitation Identification Near the Ground, is a research project by the NOAA National Severe Storms Lab and the University of Oklahoma. With the mobile app, you can send us your weather observations on the go. Are snowflakes falling on your head? Is hail hitting your car? Just select what type of precipitation is falling and press submit. It's that easy. It takes about 5 seconds and it's anonymous. Reports can then be viewed online. Our scientists will compare your report with what the radar has detected. This helps us develop new radar technologies and techniques. Download the app today, share your reports, and let's work together to make our nation weather ready. Learn more here and follow us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Now let's take a look at marine weather conditions across the state, starting off with the most recent sea ice forecast for the first week here in September. Keep in mind that the sea ice minimum always occurs in the middle of September, so we are quickly approaching the time where we'll start to see ice growth instead of ice melt. But for the time being this week, we do expect the main ice pack to shift just a little bit with the winds to the southwest, but continuing to melt just a bit and then continuing to thin out some of the ice that's up there, with the greatest concentrations remaining in the Beaufort Sea. Now, as far as winds and waves go, we'll see a trend as we go through here. Wednesday, we're going to see a bit stronger conditions, and then as we get into the day on Thursday, things are going to start to taper off a bit. So how does that look over the Panhandle? Well, on a Wednesday morning, we are going to see winds over most of the area out of the south, with seas in the interior waters between 3 and 4 feet. And then out over the Gulf there, we'll see winds out of the south with seas peaking up to about 10 feet there. And then to keep that trend going, just decreasing here when we get into the day on Thursday, we see a bit more of a westerly component to our winds, and then we see the seas drop off to about 7 feet in the outer waters, staying around 3 to 4 feet in the interior waters. Interior waters keep the winds mostly out of the south. Now, for Wednesday over towards the North Gulf and then the Cook Inlet area and Prince William Sound, we do see winds there primarily out of the south to southwest in a lot of places, and then the highest winds and waves are going to be over the North Gulf. Over most of the Cook Inlet area, we'll see winds out of the southwest and then seas up to about 2 feet. And then for Thursday over that same area, we do see that drop off again over the North Gulf, where we see seas drop down to 4 to 5 feet, and then winds drop down to be 10 to 15 knots. We see the strongest winds and waves for our Thursday in the vicinity of Augustine Island, there at the mouth of Cook Inlet, where we'll see winds up to 20 knots and seas up to 5 feet. Now over towards the Alaska Peninsula for Wednesday on the Pacific side here, we see the strongest winds out of the west up to about 20 knots, depending on where you're at. Kodiak Island gets the stronger winds, and then further west we see them drop off a bit to about 15 knots. Over Bristol Bay, winds out of the northwest up to about 10 knots with 3-foot seas. And then we do see a continued improving trend as we get into the day on Thursday. Winds stay primarily out of the west to northwest, most places up to about 15 knots, and seas ranging between 3 and 5 feet. Further out the Aleutian chain, now we get into Wednesday. Most of the winds are going to be out of the northwest over the central part of the Aleutians. Further west, though, we see a shift in the wind direction. That's ahead of an approaching frontal system. So we'll see winds there out of the southwest and continuing to see an increase in the winds and the waves in the far western part of the Aleutians on Wednesday. So when we get into Thursday, we are going to see seas up to about 8 feet, shifting directions in our wind, where we've got a due northerly wind in the far western part of the Aleutians and a straight southerly wind for the central part of the Aleutians. Strongest winds up to about 25 knots in the vicinity of Kiska and Shamia. Now up the west coast, we see winds primarily out of the north for the day on Wednesday, with the strongest winds and waves coming through the Bering Strait area and then over towards Norton Sound, where we'll see winds up to about 25 knots and seas between 5 and 6 feet. Further south, we see both the winds and the waves drop off. That trend does hold on Thursday, where we have the strongest winds and waves through the Bering Strait and around Norton Sound. Norton Sound itself, you guys should stay in pretty good shape, but once you get over towards Nome, which is kind of right there on the western edge there, that's where you're going to start to see the strongest conditions. Now further south in the Bering, winds stay mostly out of the north, although a bit shifty in direction, seas 3 to 5 feet. Now up over the Arctic coast for the day on Wednesday, strongest winds and waves are going to be from Wainwright southward down along the west coast, where we'll see seas up to about 7 feet and then winds up to about 25 knots. Over the northern part of the coast there, we see our winds to be mostly east to northeast with 3 to 4 feet, and that's what's going to take the remaining ice that's out there and continue to shift that to the southwest, and that trend holds as we get into the day on Thursday. Stronger winds now on Thursday up over the Arctic, where we see winds between 20 and 25 knots and in open water seas between 5 and 6 feet there south of the ice pack, and then winds start to lessen a bit as you get around the west coast, but down to about 20 knots with seas 5 to 6 feet. Now taking just a quick recap here at the overall weather pattern, broad low pressure is going to persist as we go through the overnight hours over most of mainland Alaska, keeping us in the clouds and showery conditions most places. Every place should be warm enough that any precip that's out there is rain, unless you're up at higher elevations over some of the terrain. And then getting into the day on Wednesday, we do see a new area of low pressure push its way into the far western part of the Aleutians, and another low pressure system tracks its way to the Panhandle, with showery conditions persisting across most of the state. Thank you for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.